All right. I think we have the time of noon, so let's get started with this session recap. I just want to start out by saying thank you to everyone for joining us today. Also, a huge thank you to all of our members. We had a good session. Obviously, there's ups and downs in every session, but do want to say thank you for those members who took time, whether it's reaching out locally to your elected officials or heading to our day on the hill or any events that we have been hosting. It does make a difference. And so just want to thank you for that. Want to thank all of our staff. Certainly Hunter and Lauren are at the Capitol on a daily basis, but beyond that, obviously our field staff works hard to make sure our counties are represented too. So we want to recognize them. But with that, I do turn it over to Hunter and Lauren to kind of recap what we saw throughout the session. So with that, appreciate everybody joining us.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. My name's Lauren Dower. I'm your Director of Public Policy with Minnesota Farm Bureau. Very excited to sort of be the host for today's meeting. Just going to run through some logistics here, just some virtual meeting tips. If you want to kind of click into your little box, your name, change your name, identify who you are, make sure you're muted throughout this conversation, just so then we can have a clear presentation. But essentially, I'll be turning it over to Hunter here to run through the entire stage session. And at the conclusion of the presentation, that's when we will be taking questions. For everyone's awareness, this recording will be available on our website and on YouTube after we get done with it today. So just so that everyone's aware of that. If there's anything else, does anyone have a quick question before we get started? If not, Hunter, I will turn it over to you.
Fantastic. And thank you, Lauren. I think I know most of you, but for those of you who don't know me, my name's Hunter Peterson, and I serve as your public policy specialist at Minnesota Farm Bureau. And so I'm basically our staff person that's at the state capitol every day that they're in session, talking with folks, make sure we know what's going on, and that we, communicate and accomplish as many of our priorities as we can. So that's me. And so I'll be talking about what happened in the 2026 legislative session. And we'll just start with a high level, or I should say, actually, really an overview of kind of the dynamics heading into session on the next slide here.
Might be slow on my end, Hunter. Apologize.
Okay.
That. Let me get it working here. There we go.
There we go. Excellent. Yeah, okay, so this is kind of the layout. This is the format of our presentation today. So like I said, we'll start with an overview of kind of what things were like heading into session and what those dynamics were. And then we'll kind of jump to the very end of what were the high level outcomes of session, what was kind of the final deal that came together and the high level items there. And then with respect to our priority issues that we establish every year, family farm legacy, rural economic vitality, energy and farmland preservation, and environmental stewardship. We'll go through a little bit more of the agricultural tax, environmental items, things that are, I guess, pretty pertinent to agriculture, and what happened with those, if they made it, if they didn't make it. And then at the very end, we will take questions. So let's move on. There we go. Overview of session. So, again, very almost evenly divided legislature, evenly tied House with 67 Democrats, 67 Republicans. And then in the Senate, you had a one-seat majority for the Democrats And it was the second year of the biennium. So, 2025, they passed that 2-year budget. So they didn't need to do a budget this year. Um, Traditionally, the second year of the biennium is often known as being a year for a bonding bill. And as you'll see on the future slides, that was one of the things that they were able to accomplish. But, I always kind of say that generally in the second year of the biennium, there might be pressing policy items in certain places, but there's nothing that they are constitutionally compelled to do, right? Whereas in the first year, they do have to pass that budget. And so just already going in, you have a very divided legislature. You have, nothing. I mean, again, maybe a couple items that needed action, but nothing constitutionally mandated. And going into an election year. And then on top of that, I think we saw certainly even more heightened political tension resulting from, over the winter, a lot of the investigations and things that came forward on fraud, as well as Operation Metro Surge. And so, I think those were big things for people, on both sides of the aisle, frankly. And so I think those issues got people kind of stirred up and, um, I think it just added to the question of will this be a productive session or are they going to be really stuck on these things, which again, understandably why, but that was kind of one of the big questions heading in, and that was kind of how the dynamics were set up. So, um, and then moving to the high level outcomes here, we so this is kind of like the really the high level items that were included in the final deal that legislative leaders and the governor arrived at. So we got the bonding bill, tax bill. It's been a while since they passed a tax bill in the second year of the biennium, but if you were at Day on the Hill, or if you're on our board and you came up, you'll recall the two things I told people to communicate to legislators in their meetings, if nothing else, was that ask for a strong bonding bill for Greater Minnesota and for rural communities, and then a tax bill that's good for agriculture. And I we'll get into the details, but I think we did a good job there. Um, Another thing that was part of that deal was stabilization funding for the Hennepin County Medical Center. Um, you know, People all over the state end up there. It's the only safety net hospital in the state. And so, I think if we were to lose that, that would be to the detriment of the whole state, not just the metro or specific region. So that was certainly important. They established the Office of the Inspector General and did some other work relating to combating fraud. Again, another thing that's certainly welcome. Um, One-time property tax relief, they did that through, they basically took the homestead credit refund that people apply for, and they increased that by, I think, just under 15% for the next property tax year. Um, And then similarly, one-time vehicle tab fee reduction. Um, that's another item that's been in the news. And then this last piece wasn't necessarily, part of the deal, but I think notably, one of the things that did not get done was an agriculture bill. And again, we'll get more into the details of why that shook out the way it did here. So now we'll jump on to our priority issues. And so our first one here is family farm legacy. Um, Really, the victory we got here was in the tax bill. Us and pretty much every other agriculture group have been asking the legislature to remove the funding cap on the beginning farmer tax credit, and they put that cap on there in 2023 at funding of $4 million a year. Now the problem with that essentially is that once that $4 million has been taken up by the program, you could be totally qualified and apply for the credit, and because there's no more funding left, you're not going to get it. And so, if there are people who want to be new farmers, beginning farmers, and get out there, we want to encourage that. We want to get as many new farmers out there as possible, of course. And so, obviously, having that cap on the credit isn't really conducive to that. And so, that's why we've been asking for that cap to be removed. We kind of got a half measure here of a 1 year suspension on that funding cap. Um, you know, Certainly we would still like to see, we'll keep working towards permanent removal, but the hope at least is that suspending that cap for a year will allow people who, and we have members who have been through this, that have applied for this program, 2, 3, maybe even 4 times. They're qualified and they haven't been able to get in. So the hope is that those folks who've tried before in the past and haven't been able to get the credit, this way, if they apply this year, they should be able to get it. And hopefully that will, work through some of the backlog that exists as a result of that funding shortage. So we got that. We didn't get the permanent removal. And then there was a host of provisions that they were in the Senate tax bill last year, and we got a handful of them, not quite all of them, including the tax bill again this year, related to special ag homestead. And I like to say that it would be modernizing it, changing some of the familial and geographic requirements of utilizing special ag homestead. But unfortunately, we didn't get those across the finish line. And I think that's something that I think they're really good common sense measures that don't really cost very much, if anything at all. And so we'll keep working on those down the road. But so that was kind of how we fared on our family farm legacy issue. Moving on to rural economic vitality. Could you go to the next one, please, Lauren?
Did it switch for you, Hunter?
Yep, just did. Thank you. So rural economic vitality. Oh, sorry, now we went too far.
Yeah.
Might take a second to go back, but there we go. So rural economic vitality. I think the biggest ticket item here, again, was the bonding bill. And so a few different really good things in here. One thing that we advocated for was for the project for the St. Paul Student Center at the University of Minnesota and McGraw Library. I know folks who and that's where all the ag programs for the University of Minnesota are hosted, is on the St. Paul campus, and that's why this matters. And so talking to folks who were probably on campus about 20 years ago, and they said, yeah, even then the student center probably could have used a facelift or some work. Okay, thank you for the note, Joel. We'll get to that at the end here. But yeah, knowing that student center has been in need of some attention for a while, wanting to be competitive regionally with other schools that have strong ag programs like South Dakota State or Iowa State, I think investing in a student center like this, I think for prospective students, it shows that the university is willing to invest in these programs, in agriculture programs, and in them as students. And so, the hope is that that gets reflected in that when people come to campus, they go, wow, this is a place I want to come to school to study agriculture. And we know too that, generally speaking, folks who come to Minnesota for college, whether they're from here or not, they tend to stay here. And so that's another great benefit of that. And then additionally in the bonding bill, not going to get too much into other specific projects, but think it's important to note that 420 million for water infrastructure. So that could be, sewers, wastewater, could be drinking water treatment, all those things that everybody needs, everybody relies on. And then I forgot to put the million after 177 there. So it's 177 million for transportation projects across the state. And again, I think these are both things that really benefit greater Minnesota and rural communities, especially when sometimes these are the projects that small towns don't always have the tax base to fund, or some rural counties. So that's part of why I think a bonding bill is really important. In the tax bill, they did a section on um, federal conformity with some of the provisions passed in the One Big Beautiful Bill last summer. And so one of those is Section 179 conformity. So obviously, if you buy equipment or some kind of, a tractor combine or some sort of equipment asset, this basically helps you deduct the that investment sooner rather than spreading it out over time as it depreciates. And so, I don't know that it's like the top line of the tax bill, but I still think it's an important thing to note. And so did just want to give that a shout out as well. Um, the dairy with an I modification. This passed earlier in the session. I think the governor signed it into law early April about basically what this was. So when they, so the Dairy with an I program essentially is an incentive for dairy farmers to sign up for the federal DMC, Dairy Margin Coverage Program, which is, help manage risk essentially when, milk prices aren't great. And so with the Dairy with an I program, the legislature basically re-upped that back in 2023. And now that it's been a few years and there's still money there that hasn't gone out the door, we ran into this situation where people, when they wrote the bill in 2023, for people to apply for the program and qualify, one of the things that they had to have was a milk production history from 2022. And so, being a few years down the road, we're fortunate to have about, 30 or so farms across the state that, either didn't exist in 2022, they're new, or maybe they were just getting started. Um, but because they didn't necessarily have that full production history from 2022, they couldn't qualify for the program. So this bill basically corrected that and allowed those 30 or so new dairy farms to get in and be able to utilize this program. So I think it's, one of those things that it is a small fix, but I think it's very meaningful for the people that it affects. And so that was another one that we were glad to see get through. Um, Another one that honestly is very simple and straightforward and should have gotten through if it hadn't run into politics was extending the Farmer Lender Mediation Act. Um, basically that just if you're a farmer and you're struggling with managing your debt, that's a program that gives you a few options to work with your creditors rather than, facing foreclosure or whatever it might be. You have some options on how to, renegotiate or resolve your debt. And obviously that keeps farms from, going into bankruptcy, quite honestly. So, um, um, that's set to expire. It's either the end of June or the beginning of July 2027. So we do have next year to get this done. And knowing that they have to pass a budget next year and work on some other things, I think that decreases the chance that this gets caught up in the politics. But I think ultimately that's really the reason it didn't make it across the finish line this year. And I find that to be pretty unfortunate. But we still, like I said, we still have time, and we're gonna hit it pretty hard next year, I think. So, moving on to energy and farmland preservation. So, really, the biggest one here is the expansion and extension of the sustainable aviation fuel tax credit. One second, please. So That tax credit originally established a few years back. Um, they upped the amount for production of SAF. You could get a credit of up, I believe, $2 a gallon for production, based on the carbon intensity of the feedstock that's used. Um, I believe it's through 2035. But the idea here, right, is we're trying to use the feedstocks that our farmers grow here in Minnesota, whether it be corn, soybeans, or what have you, that can be made into this renewable fuel that can help decarbonize the aviation industry. And so, in addition to just being Minnesota and having a lot of these things grown here, we have Delta here, and they have a hub at MSP, and MSP is a big airport, important airport. Um, and I think that, really the last piece there and what this credit aims to do is to attract people who are going to be producing and blending this fuel to set up shop in Minnesota. Um, so obviously it's a nice incentive for that. I think the other piece that we would like to see a little more action from the legislature on that also ties into this is permitting reform. They got some modest stuff done with that last year, but I think there's still more that can be done to make Minnesota attractive for those businesses that want to come here. So, again, not complaining by any means about the credit. We're very happy to have that. I think it's fantastic. But there is that permitting and regulatory piece to it as well, as far as attracting businesses and being competitive with our neighboring states for this. Um, Nuclear energy generation study. So you'll see right below that, that we unfortunately did not get an elimination of the nuclear moratorium this year. Minnesota is one of the few, maybe even the only state in the country that has a nuclear energy moratorium that was set up, I believe 1994 about. And so that's kind of, as far as nuclear energy goes, really what's in the way of us building new facilities, whether that's a full-fledged nuclear energy plant or just, small modular reactors. Um, but the good news is that they did do this study. And the hope is that, once they come back with this study, that it will bolster some support for nuclear energy. And again, really what this whole conversation comes back to around nuclear energy, we as a state have the carbon-free electricity by 2040 mandate in place. And so as an organization, we support nuclear energy because we believe that, if we want to have reliable, affordable energy, I think nuclear is really one of the few things that is going to give you consistent baseload power. But also, if we're going to meet that goal that the state has set, we should be having all our options on the table rather than just picking and choosing which carbon-free technologies we like or don't like. So really, it's getting back to that and just having everything on the table. Um, and we are part of the Nuclear Energy Alliance. And so that's a big group of folks, and I have full faith that they're going to continue to keep working on this and trying to move it forward. So um, that's kind of the update on nuclear. And then lastly here, the county agricultural priority land list. This is a bill that Minnesota Corn brought forward this year, and we supported. Got an informational hearing in the Senate Agriculture Committee, and really what it allows counties to designate productive agricultural land. Basically, if you have a good CPI, designate that land as being unsuitable for electricity generation. So basically, solar panels or wind. That's obviously a conversation I think that our membership and our organization has a lot, is that need for energy and balancing private property rights. And the bill is very permissive. Counties don't have to do this. And there's also a pretty good way that people who you know, even if your farmland was productive and you decide, well, it's my farmland and I still want to put solar panels on it, there's a process for landowners to get their land off of that if the county decided to go down the road of establishing such a list. Um, so, you know, I think this year they were kind of just trying to get the idea out there and see what people thought and get people exposed to it. But, you know, I think whether it's, you know, solar panels, transmission lines, what have you, I think there's a lot of conversation everywhere around the state right now happening about, you know, citing those things and where they go. And so I think this would be a really good step in just having a little bit more assurance for agriculture in those conversations. And then lastly, but certainly not least, environmental stewardship. You'll see that all these items listed here failed. That's a good thing. We did not want any of these items to pass, but these all were things that, you know, I mean, the paraquat ban got more traction than anything else, but these all did receive hearings in this past legislative session. And, you know, myself and some of our members who are just fantastic stepped up and testified on them and talked about why they weren't good ideas. You know, I don't know that I'm going to go through each one of these super in depth because I think most of you have an idea of what the implications of these are. Um, you know, I guess I will just say on the paraquat ban, out of all these, that definitely got the most momentum. And honestly, I don't know that we necessarily expected it to, because this was an issue that really popped up. I think I kind of first heard about it in January. Um, but and really ultimately this is kind of why the legislature didn't end up passing an agriculture bill. Um, on the House side, the Democrats on the House Agriculture Committee publicly and clearly stated that they were not going to advance any kind of agriculture bill unless it included a ban on paraquat. And just as a reminder, you know, paraquat's an herbicide, EPA approved. You know, I think there's concerns from some people that it causes Parkinson's disease, and the EPA doesn't agree with that. There's mixed science on it, and you know, I understand where those folks are coming from, but I think it's important to remember we're talking about a very highly regulated chemical here. You know, you have to be a certified applicator to use paraquat. So it's a restricted use pesticide. Um, there's, you know, even additional training specific to paraquat that you have to go through. And you know, because it is pretty toxic. The way they packages with a closed loop system to try and prevent spills and things like that from happening. So I think we have to keep all that in mind and remember too that, you know, we're not using a ton of this stuff, but there are situations, you know, particularly for some sugar beet growers, but also, you know, for some conservation practices like cover crops or conservation tillage. Um, you know, this is something that can be used and sometimes really actually does need to be used, but is used sparingly. Um, but so going back to the political conversation on it, really, you know, the House Democrats really said, you know, we believe this causes Parkinson's disease and we think it needs to be banned. Republicans on that committee disagreed. And so, you know, they did vote in committee to try and pass an agriculture bill out and didn't make it. And you know, there was conversations happening in the background after that for the rest of the session about whether or not there was going to be an ag bill, especially on the House side. But that dynamic ultimately stayed the same pretty much. And in that last week of session, Jerry Anderson did try to get a bill out off the floor, but again, you know, Representative Hansen stated on the floor for pretty much, you know, the same reason. There's no paraquat ban in this, and the Democrats did not vote for it. So no ag bill came out of the House. The Senate passed one 55 to 10. and that did not have the ban in it. It originally did in committee, but they pulled it out in committee. Senator Kupek, Democrat from Moorhead, voted with the Republican members of the committee to remove that from the bill. So ultimately, the paraquat ban didn't move forward, but really also this was the same reason we didn't get an agriculture bill. But I think as our membership knows and appreciates, there are times where at the legislature, nothing is better than something. And, I think from our perspective, um, I don't know that there was necessarily going to be a lot in an agriculture bill that was going to somehow make this a worthwhile trade-off. And aside from setting, precedent for the state to ban things that are approved by the EPA, just didn't seem like a road that should have been gone down and wasn't. So, um, I think more broadly with all these items listed here, depending on how the election goes this fall, there's certainly concern that these will come up again next year. But I think at least them having hearings this year, we got our position on these issues out there and known. And I think we'll be ready to go if these do come up again in the future. So um yeah, but bottom line is the good news this year is that none of these made it. No bad things happened as far as you being able to use the voluntary best management practices that you think are best for your farm. So, and I think that finishes up the priority issues. And so now, yeah, we're on to questions.
Sweet. Well, thanks a lot, Hunter, for that presentation and quick recap of the entire session.